Hi, welcome to Seaside Quilting Tutorials. My name is Terry, and today we're going to be making a Bali Bowl using fabric and the Duet fusible, double-side fusible. And we'll also be using the Auntie 2 pattern AT101. Okay, let's get started. So your first step will be cutting out your fabric strips and your Duet fusible strips. So I just wanted to show you. So we're using the Bowls today, the Duet Fuse 2 double-sided fusible, and you'll go ahead and check on the back side of your pattern, and you'll see instructions according to which size you're choosing. There's the basic bowl, and then there's the catnap bowl, and the I think it's the bucket. So once you've cut all your strips out, I'm just going to adjust my camera a little bit more. You'll take them to your sewing machine, sorry, and you will stitch them together, right side to right side, and I just did a 1/4 of an inch seam across. Let me grab my applique mat. So to do this part, you'll want an applique mat. I really love the Fuse mat by the Gypsy Quilter. It works very, very well. You never have to worry about anything sticking to it, so it really comes in handy. Oh, I forgot to turn on my iron. It heats up fast, so it won't take very long. So you're going to fold down your top edge on here. Just getting a couple threads off there. So about a 1/2 inch. And I'm going to press that real quick, just so it stays down for me. Just takes a minute to heat up the iron. Okay, now that I've got that there, I'll lower the camera just a little more. I want to make sure that we're able to get everything in here. So you lay your strip out, and I like to line up my Duet on here, and you'll keep it somewhat centered on your, and it's not like there's a lot of extra on each side. Approximately, there'll be approximately 1/8 of an inch over on each side of your Duet fuse when you lay it down. And that's what I meant by having it centered on there. I mean, it doesn't have to be exact, but you do want just a little bit extra on each side. Now once you get it on there somewhat, you're going to flip this around so that your Duet fuse is underneath your fabric. You have your right side of your fabric up, your Duet is underneath, now that our iron is, oops, it got tangled around. Sorry about that. So once that's done, you'll, like I said, you'll have your Duet fuse down. Your fabric, the right side is up. We're fusing that Duet to the wrong side of your fabric, and we're just going to press it. And it's good to do this on your Amplifuse mat or whichever applique mat you have handy. Seaside Quilting Supplies does have the Amplifuse mats available. And it just makes it so that this isn't going to stick to your ironing board or to your iron. Okay. So we have that one fused, and you'll see it lifts right up, doesn't stick at all. And I've got that upper part fused. Now I'm just going to fuse the bottom part of it, and we'll get it adjusted on here, and we'll flip that over, and we'll fuse that part. And it doesn't take long for it to fuse. It fuses pretty quickly. I just got a little bit more. Before I do the rest of it, because I just have a small section here to fuse. Whoops, I got this side a little bit off. Let's fix that before I have a problem. And I flipped it, I moved it. So I'm just going to fix that real quick. And you're going to press, not iron, not going back and forth. You're just going to do a press. And holding your iron on there for about, I don't know, 3 to 5 seconds or so. Making sure that it got fused down. Okay. So then what we're going to do with the next piece is you're going to do this along all your strips. So you're going to take your next piece and you're just going to butt that up against your last piece. So you want it right up there. Make sure that I'm getting this on camera really well. So I have my piece here that I'm adding on, and I'm just going to push it up against the piece that I've already ironed down. And it comes in handy if you have 2 of these mats, because then you could just lay one over and not have to flip it. But I'm going to flip it, and I'm just going to check to make sure that I got it in there equally. I'm going to check from the bottom to make sure that I've got it butted up against there real good. And you could just lay your fabric over it as you go and just move your fuse up. Okay, so we'll press that. Whoops. closed so you can see they're butted up against each other. And we're just going to move along and get the rest of that piece fused onto the fabric. Okay, so go ahead and continue to do this all the way through and get your Duet fused to your fabric, and I'll meet you over at the sewing machine. I did jump ahead of myself just a little bit. Once you have this all pressed and you've got your Duet fusible set onto one side, we're going to turn it over and we're going to fold each side into the middle. And I've already started this one so it would be easier to show you, but you're just going to fold each side so it lines up in the center like that. And we're going to press it again, and I'm finding that when we press it this way, since it's a little thicker, I do have to hold my iron on there just a little bit longer to set that in place. And you just keep folding your sides into the center and pressing as you go. And while it's warm, if you have those silicone fingertips, it kind of helps. The heat from the iron doesn't bother me too much, but I just kind of push while it's still warm. I just push these because they start to separate while they're hot. But the silicone fingertips really help, so you're not burning your fingers while you're doing it. And I'm just going to keep folding these in each side into my center as I go. Now you could pin them, or you could clip them ahead of time and maybe make it a little quicker. I'm not sure. I just do mine this way. And like I said, it does take a little bit longer because you're working through a little more thickness to get that to stick. And you just continue to fold those two sides into the center. Yeah, you do have to hold it on there just a little bit longer to make sure that it's getting a good stick. And if the heat does bother your fingers when you're playing with it, as you go, Seaside Quilting Supplies does have those silicone fingertips available. I have some of those fingertips in my other room. I use them when I'm doing things with my glue gun, because that glue can stick to your fingers and get pretty hot. So as you can see, I'm having to hold my iron a little bit longer. Sometimes have to push this in a little bit until it cools down so it's sealing. Not a lot, but just a little bit. So go ahead, finish doing that. And you'll see that you have your sides. They'll be going each side into the middle. And you just continue to do that all the way through your strips. And then we'll definitely meet you over at the sewing machine after. Okay. So for this next part, you've got this pressed. You could do it without pressing it. You could just fold your sides in. And I'm going to show you that after I do the part that I pressed. But if you didn't want to press it, if you find that tedious, that's okay. You can just fold in your sides. Get this so you can see in the camera. You could just fold in your sides. And you can fold this in half and kind of finger press it, or you could clip it as you go and keep sewing. So it's up to you whether or not you want to press the whole thing so that it's pre-folded for you, or if you just want to do it at your machine and finger press it in. With the iron, pressing it down, it keeps it together while you're at your machine. The other way, you have to do it as you go and hold it together as it goes through the machine. So it's really just depending on which way you prefer, and I'll let you decide on that for yourself. But with the double-sided fusible, you're able to press it ahead of time and have this all done. And it is a little tedious to get it, all pressed all the way through. But once you get to that point, then it gets a little easier because you just fold it in half. So, let me see. Trying to measure up my guide foot here. Probably won't go through as easily. So you're going to, once you have this all pressed, you're going to fold this in half again, okay? You're going to have the folded side out to the left, and your seam side, the part that's coming together, over to your right when you sew it. And we're just going to use our regular foot, just your basic foot. I'm hoping that you're being able to see that well in the camera. And let me get my awl here. So the folded side, the side that we're going to be sewing on, will sort of run up against the inside of this foot, right in here. Let me see. Maybe if I hold this against paper, we'll see if that shows up a little bit better. There we go. So on your foot, as you're running your fabric through, your flush side is going to be right underneath here. on this side, on your left side of your foot. And the side that is open that we're sewing is going to kind of run up against the inside of your foot on this side over here. So I just wanted to point that out because I know sometimes that becomes a question when we're doing something. I'm going to be using a Microtex 90 needle when I do my straight stitching. I'm going to set my stitching length on 3.0 for a longer stitch. Makes it a little quicker to go through. Now your stitches will show on both your top and your bottom, so you want to use matching thread on both sides, on your top and your bobbin. I'm using Aurifil thread today. I like that thread. It's very sturdy and strong for sewing, and since I'm using an all cotton fabric, that's what I've chosen for my thread. Okay, let's start sewing. So when you first put this under here, you're going to want to make sure that your fabric is all the way in, so that when your needle comes down, and I'm going to move my needle just, let me see, over to the right 2 notches, because I want to kind of get towards the edge but not too close to the edge when I'm sewing. And you're just going to keep this folded and lined up as you're going through. And it helps if you don't have your machine inserted into a table. They do have quite often for machines, especially the newer ones, plastic extension tables that can go around the throat of your machine so that you have a nice flat surface to work on. If you are not able to get one for your machine, I've seen some people sometimes are able to put a couple of books or whatever in front to help press it down. It depends on the bottom where your throat is, whether or not you have something else sticking out there. When I put my piece on that goes around my throat and whatnot, it gives me a little more room out to here to press on. But I do like the extension tables that can go around your machine, and find them pretty handy as well. Okay. So you want to keep these so that they're folded together, so that these 2 edges are going to match up with each other. Okay? So they're right together on this side, and this is the side that we're sewing on. And like I said, you just want to get that underneath your needle real well, so when you bring your needle down, it's already in your fabric. You don't want to be pushing your fabric up against your needle to try to get it in there, because it will just stick. It won't go anywhere. And so my fabric is just a little bit underneath the foot on this side, just, you know, where it's coming out, just a little tiny bit. But it's right up against the edge of my foot over here. And I'm just going to fold this together as I go. To tell my machine that I'm sewing through heavy. So I'm letting my machine know, and if your machine has the capability to be able to tell it that you're using a woven heavy you want to do that because it will help adjust your tension. And this is a little bit thicker than it was doing the one with the clothesline. So I want to make sure I let my machine know that I'm going through some thicker fabric. The other thing is that I want to turn the speed of my machine down, so I'm going slow. And you don't want to get your fingers in there too close. So if your fabric's not going through in the beginning, you can push down with your awl and kind of help get it going into your machine. But be careful of getting your fingers up there too close. We don't want you sewing through your fingers. And if you need to, you can go ahead and grab onto the back once it's coming through. And you're not going to pull or anything. You're just going to kind of hold it steady so it's staying straight on both sides as it's going through. Let me check my stitches. I've kind of got that going in the center more than I've got it going on the edge. So you might want to move it over more than a couple notches to the right. Oh, I know what happened when I came back. Let me take these stitches out. I had moved it over, but then when I told my machine that I was working with heavy and it came back, it put my needle back in its normal straight stitch position, and I want my stitch to be a little more over to the edge. So even when we do this stuff, we sometimes, even though we know what we're doing, we still sometimes goof up. It happens. That's why we have a seam ripper. Don't like to use it, but if we have to, it's good to have them on hand. And I'm just gonna get those extra stitches, threads off there from the stitches that I ripped out. Okay, so then again, I'm going to move my needle a couple notches to the side. So I have it on 0.5. Let me see. Actually, I'm going to move it over just a little bit more. So it's actually on 1.0 on this side. That way I'll be sewing. I'm going to hold my fabric in the same way, in the same position, but I have my needle moved over. And I moved it over 4 clicks, and that put it on 1.0. So my needle is over to the side. It's 4 notches over to the side of that white. And that's why we're using the wider opening foot, not a straight stitch foot. So we can move our needle over where we need it. Make sure your fabric is underneath when your needle comes down. Get some of these threads off here out of the way. And like I said, you sometimes do need your awl so that you can guide this under. Just make sure you don't get your awl under the needle either, because then you'll bust your needle. And not pushing hard, just gently guiding it underneath there until we get enough in the back that we can hold on to it. And you just fold this as you go, making sure that they line up. And then I'm going to hold it in the back so it stays straight. And also so my fingers aren't so much in your way as I'm sewing, so you can see what I'm doing. And I did slow my machine down. If you don't have the capability on your machine to slow it down, just press easy on your presser foot down there. So you adjust your speed by just pressing a little more gently. Because if you go fast when you're going through bulk, sometimes you'll end up with a busted needle, and we don't want that. I know I'm a speed demon behind my machine. I like to go a little bit faster, but some projects you have to slow down. Yes, that's a little bit better. It's more towards the edge instead of in the center. Okay. And you just keep folding and sewing across. And we're setting this up so that we can put it together and make our bowl. Okay, so I've come to the part where I had it pre-pressed, and it is, I'm not gonna lie, it's a little easier if you do take the time to press it ahead of time. Now if you decide, you can just fold this as you go and just fold your sides in to the center and then fold it over. And it can be a little more difficult this way, but if you have a hard time standing up for a long period of time to do all the pressing, you can do it this way and just fold it over. And if you want, you can even, let me see, take a clip or a pin. You could fold it into the middle, both sides of it, and then fold it over. And put a clip on there, or you can stick a pin in there to hold it. And then sew up to that point. And just continue to do that. If you choose to do it that way, it's really up to you what works better for you. Everyone's a little different, so I wanted to show you both options of doing this. And if you have any straggler threads on your fabric, you can just tuck them inside. Just keep it flush on this side as best you can. And you would just keep folding it as you go. You just kind of finger press it down. Fold it over. And you can just, you know, push down on it to finger press it, or you can clip it, whichever way is going to work the best for you. For me, sometimes standing at my ironing board or cutting table for long periods of time, I get tired of doing it, and it's easier to just sit. And I do have a stool over there, so I can sit down. So it all depends on your options and what you have available. But I wanted you to see that there are a couple of options with this. And both ways work. And some of you may still have some of the single-sided fusible Duet. I still have some around in my storage area, but I don't have a lot of it left, but I have a little bit of it left. And eventually I'll use it up on a project. So you would just keep doing that as you go. So either way that you've decided to do this, if you've decided to pre-press it, or if you decided to fold as you go, whichever way you've chosen, just go ahead and finish sewing all the way till you get to the end of your strips. And once you get to the end of your strips, we'll start putting our bowl together. Okay, so now we've made our fabric rope. As we're making this, the bottom of our basket, we want this folded part, this part that we sewed the side on, and it's got like a little bit of an opening. We want this side to stay on the inside, and we're going to keep the flush side on the outside. So you're just going to turn this in, I'd say about an inch. You're just going to kind of turn it in like this. Oh, before we do that, before we get to that part, I checked my bobbin because I was getting low on thread. You want to make sure that you're going to have plenty of thread to be able to go through. So it kind of depends on what size that you're making, but I like when I'm starting this part to make sure that I have plenty of thread so that I'm not going to run out in the middle and have to cut my thread and start over. Also, I've changed out to a denim needle 110. It will make it a little easier where it's going to be going in a zigzag back and forth, catching my stitches. It's a little bit stronger, and it just helps to ensure that it's going to make it all the way through. With the clothesline one, I was able to stay with the Microtex needle, no problem. But since, you know, we're going to be going through, you know, quite a bit of thickness and stuff and doing a zigzag, I switched over to a denim needle. You want to make sure that you switch your machine over to zigzag. And I'm doing the length at 6.0, and I'm doing my width at 5 point, wait a minute, was it 5 or 6? Yeah, I did a 6. Let's see, just double checking here. So I make sure I give you the right instructions. Whoops. So I'm doing a 6 length like this, and then a width of 5.5. And that should make sure that I catch both sides as I'm going. And like I said, you're just going to fold it over approximately about an inch or so we can begin to create our circle. And you'll have to put your foot all the way up so that you can get this underneath. And you want to make sure that you have both sides of your fabric underneath your foot, and you're going to be focusing on keeping that red line in the center of your foot lined up with where the two fabrics, the two sides, are coming together. And as we go, we're going to be, you don't want this to be twisted. You don't want this to be twisted down, because then on the back side you're going to have that pleat sticking out. You want to try to focus on keeping them, you know, the openings together so it stays flush. And it will be sewing those two openings together, and it will zigzag across, catching both sides. Alright, so let's get that under our needle. And I'm lining up where the two pieces come together with the center line on my foot. And I still have my machine knowing that it's using the woven heavy. Oh, shoot. That shouldn't have happened. It's because I didn't change my foot. Yeah, I'm going to need to change my foot out. I need just a little bit wider of a foot. So this, for me, is my foot A. And my machine, I didn't notice, was telling me that I needed my foot B, which is just a little bit wider. I will be detained for just a moment while I grab my foot B. The opening's just a little tiny bit wider on the B than on my A foot. Not by a lot, but just a little bit. And it will hold in, so the sides are just a little bit wider. And with this foot, it has like 3 lines instead of one center line, but we're going to be focusing on our center line lining up with where the two pieces meet. But this foot has like 3 lines of measurement, but the same thing, we're just going to be following along, trying to keep it with the center line. And there's my cat Milan. She thinks she's my helper and my supervisor. She thinks she knows more than me. I gotta get my thread out of that. And there we go. I'm gonna have to move her. Okay, so now I have my proper foot in. I'm gonna go back and fold this again, making sure our foot is all the way up so we can get this under there nicely. And just line where the two pieces come together up with that middle. And go ahead and put your foot down. And I'm just going to double check my zigzag that it's going to meet up with this foot and not need the larger one. It should be fine. So we're going to sew ahead till we're almost to the end, and then I'm going to reverse. So I just want to make sure that I'm getting a strong hold and that I'm getting between both pieces. Go back forward. Oops. So when we get to this point, we're going to start to curl this. So I'm just going to push this side with my finger. I'll be pushing this side with my finger over. I can use my awl, whichever one works better for you. And I'm going to bring that other side around. And I'm going to do it kind of gradually. So this part's just going to come around the end of that. and I'm going to sew around. And so as I go, I'm just going to be pushing that on this side. And I'm using my awl. I could use my fingers, but it's easier if I use my awl because it gets my fingers out of the way so that you can see a little bit better. And I'm just going to follow that line, and I'm going to gradually move this, watching where my stitches are catching on each side. And so I'm going to turn this a little bit more and just keep doing that as you go. And we're working on forming our circle. And it does pop up a little bit on you. That's fine. And I can see, and I'll show you. I'm actually going to put my even wider foot in because it just makes it a little bit easier. To hold that down. This one's just, the hole in the middle is not wider, but my foot is a little bit wider and will help me with holding this down. So as I was going through, just so that you can see, let me put a paper behind me so that you can see a little bit better. I didn't catch this part up in here. I didn't quite get it squished together enough, and it didn't catch both sides very well. So I've got a gap there. I've got a hole right here. So I've cut my stitch, and I'm going to go back over to about here, and I'm going to make sure that that gets pushed a little bit better up against there so I can catch both sides and get a good stitch in there. And for this one, I'm going to actually lower the length of my stitch down to a 5.0 so that I can, because as it's coming around that corner, I can see that with the 6.0 it's wider between, so it wasn't catching the stitches as well. So I'm going to do it on a 5. And that's on the length of the stitch, not the width. So I'm going to put it back under there. I'm going to lift my foot more. I'm going to put it, and I'm going to do another secure stitch just to be sure that we're catching that right. And the starting part can sometimes be a little bit difficult. So I'm going to push on the outside of this. Not real hard, but I'm going to push, and I'm going to push with this side a little bit so that I can see that those two pieces are coming together a little bit better. And I'm not going to hopefully get that gap. And this is where I'm going to reinforce it and do another reverse. Is over that hole that I had before to make sure. And let me check that. Yeah, I'm still getting that gap. So let's switch this, let me see, so that we're getting a 6.0 width. And see if that's going to catch it a little bit better. Let me take a look on the scrap. This sometimes this is the part that we have to test out first. Okay, the 6.0 should be wide enough. So we'll go back again. I'm going to cut off those extra threads and get those out of my way. Just because they will bug me to have them there. And once you get it started, it's not so bad. Okay, so I'm going to get that lined up again. And it is going through quite a bit of thickness with this, so try to squish that in there and see if I can catch those. Oh, forgot I had them reversed. That's fine. And I'm going to do a back and forth right here. So I make sure I reinforce that stitching because I don't want that stitching to come out later. And so, ooh, my goodness. Yeah, it's a little bit thick. And it wasn't liking that piece. So as you go through, well, we're going to find some trial and error while I'm doing this, so you'll be learning from me. So as you go through, you may actually need to use your awl and push that down a little bit. And you're going to want to go slow. So I'm just going to use my awl and push these sides down just a little bit because they're pretty thick, and by pushing them down it will make it that much easier for my needle to go through that fabric. And if you see your fabric poking up too high and looks like it's going to be a problem, just push it down with your awl, and it just helps flatten it a little bit easier and give your needle a little bit of an easier time. And this is why I changed over to my denim needle, to make sure the needle would be nice and strong to be able to go through. It is going through a lot of layers, and it is quite a bit thicker, and even though my machine knows it's going to be going through a thicker part, it's a little bit better to go slow so you don't end up busting the needle. So as you're turning this, just try to keep your, where the two pieces are meeting, you want to keep those together so you're catching both sides. And just keep turning, and I would keep flattening that down as I go. I know my machine can handle the layers, that's not the problem. But you do have to slow down and give the machine time to puncture through each side. And just kind of flatten that down a little bit. So you just keep turning I'm kind of using the awl on this side only because you could use your hand on this side. That would be fine to turn it, but then my fingers end up getting in the way a lot from you seeing, so I wanted to use the awl so that you have a little more view over here of what's going on, hopefully. I'm going to move my camera just a little bit here, hoping that you're going to be able to get a little more view with my hands out of the way. And I am going a little slow as I start this, just to make sure that we're catching both of the sides. And you just have to slowly turn it as you go because we're developing that circle. And I'm going to press this down just a little bit to flatten it out a little. So as I come around. And you want to keep those together and lined up with that center. I know sometimes with this one I have 3 red marks, so I have to kind of focus on that middle one so that I'm catching both of my sides of fabric as it goes through. And we will check it after we've sewn it together to make sure that we've caught our sides. And so you're going to keep slowly turning as you go. And for some reason it's stitching the line up above. Oh, I see what it's doing. So just keep turning it. And like I said, that beginning part is just a little tougher starting out. Just checking my stitching there. But once you get this going, it's not as bad. And you're going to sew this all the way around. Until you get it the width around that you need your bottom. So I'm doing the basic bowls, so I'm going to get mine to 7.5 inches around. But if you're doing one of the other sizes, you just have to go along until you get the size that you're needing for the size bowl that you're trying to achieve. So go ahead and continue to sew this all the way around. And once we get it to the size that we need it, I'll show you how we shape the sides of the bowl. And as you're getting it just a little bit bigger, you start to notice that your sides are wanting to curl up. Just kind of hold it down on this side with one finger. Or I can show you with all. So just hold it down on this side with one finger and press this side down flat so that it's staying flat and not curling up on you and ending up sewing it the wrong way. So you just kind of want to hold it down as you go around. And you'll start to see how this is wanting to curl up on you. And that's okay. I just hold my hand down on it as I'm going. And I keep my finger pressed up against this side. And I keep this pressed down as I'm going. And I just continue to sew it around, holding it down. All right. Now that we have our base the size that we need it, we're going to begin to shape our sides. And so I just want to point out that if you hold it like this, you're going to end up with your sides flaring outward like this, which, you know, on some bowls that would be really nice if you were to be putting maybe some potpourri in and some little decorative things. If you hold it up like this, you get a little bit of a different outward shape. We're trying to get our sides to be going out straight. So we're going to want our sides to come up like on this one. This one was the one with the clothesline, so it looks a little it will end up looking a little bit different, but I used the same fabric on both so that I'll be able to show you at the end the differences in them. So we're trying to achieve our sides to go up straight. In order to do that, we want to hold it up against the end of our sewing machine here. Now, if you're doing a larger one, you know, like a taller one, and it gets floppy on you, you could stick like a pillow up against here to help you to keep it steady, or maybe a couple books or something like that. This one doesn't get as floppy as the clothesline one does. It's a little sturdier because of this being thicker and whatnot, but it should be just fine. Holding it up like this. I was just trying to think on something here before we get going. Okay, so we're almost to the end. We're at about the halfway point. Okay, so you're going to hold it straight up. You want to keep it as perpendicular as you possibly can. And you're going to continue to push this side over to make and keeping it your gap lined up with that center so that you're hitting both sides with your zigzag. And you're going to continue to do this all the way around. I was just looking. I'm going to show you something before we continue. Oops. Now there is a couple spots that I didn't hit very well, which will bug me. And we will check this at the end. But since I'm right here, I had just seen it a second ago. Let me see if I can find it again. And of course now I can't see where it was. Was it on the other side? I know I just saw it a couple seconds ago where I could tell. Now there's one spot here where you can tell I didn't get both sides. But I thought there was another one that was bugging me that didn't. Oh yes, here it is. So right here, I didn't get both sides. Now, it's stitched together because it caught some of it under here, but this part flipped up and it didn't get both sides. And while we don't have the sides done, shaped yet, it's easier to fix the bottom now than to wait until we get the sides done, because then it will be harder to get this underneath our machine. So I'm going to fix that right now and go back over that. And I'm going to push this in a little bit. And another thing that you could do is there is the, let me grab it here. There is some fabric glue that you can use. I like my pens better. Ah, there we go. That's what I was looking for. I keep these handy right next to my machine. The Aleene's Tacky Glue. I like the turbo one because this one dries pretty quickly for me. And you can get this from Seaside Quilting Supplies as well. I really like the pens because it has a nice point on it. And it's easier for me to stick right near my machine. Now let me go back and see. I pressed it down. Now I'm not seeing it again. Doggone it. I know it's right here. Oh, there we go. I'm going to bring the camera down for now. I wanted it up so that you could see how to hold it up against. And I'm going to put just a little tiny bit. This is probably the one I didn't poke open yet. I thought for sure I had one of these poked open. I don't want to open up. Oops, sorry about that. I'm shaking the camera around. Let me grab my glue and I'll be right back with you. Okay, I guess I did not open that other one. And I hate to open a glue until I've used the glue up. I had gotten the turbo ones from Seaside Quilting Supplies and I liked that one better, but when I didn't have any, I had grabbed some of this other Aleene's Tacky Glue in these little bottles. Whoops. And I don't need a lot up in there, but I am going to put just a little bit in there so that as I'm pushing this down, it's going to hold it nice and flat in place. So that as I sew over it, and I'm just going to keep pressing that down so that when I come back around, it's going to stay. And when I had begun to show you doing this, I got us started going in this direction, and I had to flip this over and fix it so I was going in the right direction. When it was smaller, we needed to not be going in the other direction that I was going in, because when I get to this point, I can't remember which direction I had it going in, but if I did have you going in the wrong direction, or maybe it was just my perception of it at the moment, you can just end off your thread and get it so that you're going in the right, flip it so it's going in the right direction, and we'll be going in this direction. I'm sorry about that. And I'm going to clip a couple of these threads just because they're bugging me. And hopefully I'm going to be able to see that spot. It doesn't take very long for that tacky glue to dry. And there was one more spot. Yes, right in here. And I'm going to put a tiny bit of glue right there, which also helps to clean off the top of my glue so it's not seizing up on me on the end. And I'm going to push that down in place, and I'm going to fix those two spots just because we're right close to them, and I hate trying to do it once I get my sides started. So I like to check my bottom before I do my sides. It just makes it that much easier for me in the end if I do. And I've got a spot there. Well, darn it. And when I did my clothesline one, I didn't have this occur, so I was not expecting it. And we are, once again, just as a reminder, we are using the 5.0 length, and the width of the stitches are 6.0. But sometimes if you don't push enough on the sides, I mean, you don't want to push too hard, but if you're not pushing enough on the sides, and I'm just dabbing a tissue because I got a little too much glue on there. I don't need a lot. And it won't hurt to go back around it. One of the features of these is I like that look of, you know, just that natural look. It's got the stitching. I love thread. I love fabric. So I don't mind the thread showing. And I did use a thread that goes, I think, really well with the different colors in this. Alright, so let me see. We're just going to fix this up a little bit. I know I keep losing that spot. You see it when you don't want to. There it is. So I got a couple spots I need to fix. So we're going to start with this one. Make sure I'm going in the right direction here. Oh, because I had it, when I started, I was going in that direction. I want it to go in this direction here. So as I'm coming around, I always have to think about this as I'm coming around. Well, it's not going to matter too much because we're just fixing this spot up here and we're going to end it off anyways. And I'll cut my threads, but I am going to do a back and forth a little bit right here to make sure that I get that really well. This is the first time I've used the Duet when making these. I've always used either just the natural rope, or I've used the one with the clothesline before. Okay, so I've got that piece fixed up really well. And I'm just going to do a fix here, a stabilizing, a couple of stitches. Doesn't have to be a lot, but I'm just going to go in reverse a couple times and then come back a couple times and cut my thread. So this was a learning experience for me as well in doing this with you, because I hadn't used I've used the Duet fusible in rugs and bags and other things, but I hadn't done it making a bowl before. Okay, let me think. Yeah, I had one right here that I want to make sure I catch it. I mean, it's stitched to this one, but I didn't have it pushed up enough, so it didn't catch the top of it, and I really prefer to make sure that I catch both. I'm just going to do a couple stitches back. And it's a good time to check your own. You might have done better than myself as you were going along. And hopefully you did. And I'm just going to reinforce that. And I'm going to clip my threads. Well, I'm right here. And get those out of my way. Yeah, that's much better now. And sometimes when going back and forth, like it didn't get my zigzag. Sometimes if you go too slow, you don't want to go too fast with this because you don't want to end up breaking a needle. But sometimes if you go too slow, it's for some reason it just wasn't going down and catching my zigzag. And as long as this is together really well, I wasn't overly worried about that, because on the other side I have all my zigzag going around a lot better. So there's kind of a balance of going too fast and too slow when you're making this. Like I said, this is my first experience with this one, but since I had done the clothesline one, I wanted to show how to make both of them. And I'm going to, let me see, I'm going to be going backward. Let me get this back here and get my rope out of the way. I had it up behind me before and I set it down while I was checking it. I definitely don't want a knot there. Yes, I'm going to want it to go in this direction, and that next one is right here. I'll just feel better if I go over it and make sure that I've kind of caught both the sides. Okay, trim that last thread there. These really do come out pretty, and they're so useful. And they can be a good way to use up, if you do quilting. When we do binding on our quilts, a lot of times we'll end up with pretty long pieces of binding. I quite often end up with a lot of extra pieces. And when I do end up with extra long pieces, I save them. And you can go back and you can string those together. And the fact that even if you have several of them, say, 5, 6, even more colors than that, you can string them along to each other, just like we did, attaching these strips together. And you'll get a lot of color changes as you go around your basket or your bowl, whichever one you want to call it. And they really come out looking spectacular. So it's another good way of using up your scraps. And I'm always looking for ways to use them, because we sure do end up with them when we're quilting or sewing, making different things. So it's always nice to have some things that we can use our scraps up on. I'm just double checking that last strip going through. And remember, there was one right here that was bugging me as well. But I'm kind of glad that this did happen, because when I did the clothesline one, I didn't have any. So I didn't have a way to show. What do you do? I mean, I did mention that you can go back and go over it, but I'm almost glad that I had it in this so that I could go back and show you. And with the Duet, it's kind of, because it's so much thicker, when it's coming through, if the stitch doesn't grab this side enough, then it's not pulling it to over here, and so it's not getting its lockdown that it needs. And like I said, on the other side, it was perfectly fine. It had grabbed both sides, but on the top, it didn't. Which is kind of funny, because I would have suspected it would have been on the back side that would have happened, not on the top side. Okay, we are ready to get back into business here. I'm just going to get my thread started over a couple of stitches, going back and forth, because you need to secure those stitches so they don't come out. Okay, once again, I'm going to adjust my camera. I'm going to try not to shake it too much, but I want you to see what's happening on both the bottom and the end of here where I'm holding it up. Get my rope over here. Okay, so once again, you're going to hold this up perpendicular as best as you possibly can. The straighter that you have it, the better that your sides are going to come out straighter. Move that out of my way. And you're just going to hold these two together as you're getting it to go through. And remember, don't get your fingers too close to the needle while you're doing this. And if you need to, you could use your awl to push it up, but I like my fingers, because with my fingers I'm able to kind of pinch the two together, so I feel like I'm gonna maybe get a better stable stitch doing it. Just don't get in there too close. And you really have to watch that this open part right here is lined up with that middle. And as we get going along, you'll start to see how the sides start shaping. See how I'm doing. And sometimes your rope starts to get twisted as you're going around this twist. Almost like those old phone cords. The more you'd walk around, the more that they would twist up. So I'm just going to untwist this thing. It'll probably twist up a little bit more as I'm going, but at least I can get it untwisted now. Okay. And this part doesn't take as long as making the rope itself. I find it helps if you put some music on and stay relaxed. And it helps to pass the time. There's no race in getting it done. After all, this is supposed to be fun. So you want to keep it fun by being relaxed and playing some music or listening to a show in the background. Quite often helps me to relax. And there's really nothing to stress about. I mean, these bowls end up being so beautiful. Often we worry about doing something new and kind of makes us nervous, but really, these are fun to make. There's nothing to stress about. There's no mistakes. And I mean, you think about it, in the old days, they did all these by hand. And some people probably still do make them by hand. And those braided rugs and whatnot, all made by hand. So we're doing it on a sewing machine, so it's a lot easier and faster. And there's so many things that you can do to embellish these bowls. You can sew on beads. You can make little tassels if it's like a taller basket type. You can make tassels with, feathers and beads hanging down. There's just so many cute things that you can do with them. I want to make one of the catnap size ones. I have a little bed over in the corner that I put for my cat Milan. Because she has a tendency to want to get up here and be helpful. She doesn't like to be left out of things. So I think it would just be so cute to have the catnap size of this and have it over in that corner. It would have, because these just have that organic look. I just really like them. And I'm thinking if I put some tassels on there for her, with some little feathers and whatnot, or maybe some little beads. It will give her, you know, something to play with and help her to fall asleep for her naps. So just remember, you're keeping this up straight all the time that you're doing this, because that's going to shape your side. That's going to make sure that you get those straight sides that you want. And you're just going to keep doing it all the way around. Now that my sides are starting to develop, it's a little bit easier to push this up against there. You just really have to keep your eye on that center, so you're catching both sides. Remember, don't hold your breath. You want to breathe while you're doing your project. You know, a lot of times when people get nervous about a project or doing something new, they hold their breath. You gotta breathe. I think I got my rope caught on my chair. I did. We're getting almost to the end of this. I'm really hoping that people will post pictures when they make their bowls, because I would really love to see them, and I'd love to see the different choices in fabrics and how they come together. This fabric was really interesting because it had flows of color going up and down it that changed. And I thought, wow, you know, instead of doing the different strips, different colors, which I have done before with the rope, the clothesline rope. But with this, you get to see how the colors change as it goes around. And I just thought, well, that would be interesting. And once we get our sides the height that we need them, and that will depend on which size you chose, whether you're choosing the basic one or the bucket one or the catnap one, will depend on how big your bottom needed to be and how high your sides will end up being. And you might even want to just start with a basic bowl to start with, because it's smaller, and then make one of the other ones so that you get, you know, you've gotten some practice in. You could use scraps the first time. Oh, my thread broke. No worries. Just cut that bobbin thread off. As you're going around like that and you consistently keep going around and round and round, your needle, even though I can feel it a little warm, and it's going through a lot of layers, so it builds up some heat on that needle, and every once in a while you might end up with a thread break, but that's not a problem. And to remove thread, the proper way is to snip it up at the top and pull it through the bottom, And when I can't find the bottom of it, I'm able to pop that off and grab my tweezers, because if you pull thread, if you're pulling thread, it's better to pull it this way because you're pulling it out and it's not going through your tension and different pieces over in here. If I pull my thread that way, it's coming through all these pieces and it's going to leave lint behind, and sometimes little pieces. Where coming this way, everything's coming out, so even if there is some lint left behind, I can take my little brush and I can get in there and clean that out. I can't clean out up in here. That's something you have to take in when you take it in for maintenance. The technician takes care of all that cleaning. And before you pull your thread, you always want, I should have said this before, but before you pull your thread, you always make sure that your foot is up so you're not tugging on it. By putting your foot up, it releases the tension bar, you know, the little tension rollers and stuff inside of our machines. It releases them and we can easily pull our thread out. If your thread ever gets caught in around your rollers or inside of any of your tension pieces, do not yank on it, because I did that one time. It got twisted and wrapped around and I was trying to get it out and I pulled on it, and when I did, I caused one of my rollers to actually permanently not want to go back in place, and it had to go in for maintenance. And if I had not had if it had not been under warranty at the time, it would have been an expensive fix, I was told. So, you don't want to do that. Oh, it might help if I rethread it, right? I hope that everyone is enjoying the video. I'm hoping that you're going to try making one of the bowls. Whether you choose clothesline or you choose the Duet fusible, they both make lovely bowls. I was going to say bags. I got bags on my brain because I'm going to be doing some tutorials on bags coming up. These really are pretty, and they can be useful. Secure that. I'm almost at the end of my row. And I'm keeping this straight up, so my sides are going to be straight. Watching to make sure that my two pieces the openings between the two stay lined up with that red line in the center of my thread. And I'm feeling pretty good that even though we almost broke a needle, we didn't. Pretty close to the end now. I'm always excited to see how these come out. I've seen some beautiful ones at craft fairs and whatnot. So I really would like to make my own. And I was thinking some of these in the guest room would look nice too. Some potpourri and maybe or in the bathroom with like your little hand towel and face cloth. Or you could use it for a scrap catcher when you're working on a quilt. So many things you can do with them. I think as the sides start getting together, it gets a lot easier holding this together though. Started to be right. Okay, so I will have to shape this a little bit after, but I'm almost to the end. And since excuse me, since there is batting in here, I always use my what I call my hobby scissors, because batting will dull your scissors faster. So I always use my hobby scissors for that. You're going to cut it. You want your point to be out here. So I'm just going to cut this at an angle. And you'll see why in a minute. It's a little thick. There we go. Okay. So as we come around, we're going to kind of push this up against the side. It's hard to show without my fingers being in the darn way. But we're going to push this right up against as we come around. And I'm going to use my awl because I do not want my fingers up that close as it's coming around. And I'm going to push that. I'm hoping that you're going to be able to see this well. Let me, whoops, move the camera just a little bit. So that, how I cut my end off. I've got my point out here, so I cut it in an angle going in that way. And I'm going to just guide this so it goes up against. I'm going to hold that point up against the end. Be very careful sewing it. And like I said, our binding's going to go on. I'm not overly worried. Well, I didn't even catch it. Well, that's, my goodness. I'm thinking maybe if I stick a pin in there to hold that side down, we'll try that. See if that helps, and I can take that out when I get close to it. I'm going to just go back over that. This part, I'm not worried about securing it because I know at this very end there's going to be the binding that goes over it. So I'm not worried about the stitching. I just want to catch this part and have it go down. And I'm going to go to the side and I'm going to push that in a little bit to help me. And I'm going to pull that needle out, or pin out rather. I'm just going to push this from the side. I want to make sure that my needle isn't going to hit that either. There we go. I'll just poke it from the side over here. Okay, that should be good enough. Like I said, your binding's going to go around and cover that up. If we were not putting binding on, you would end off a little bit differently when you do the natural bowls, but on this one, we have binding that's going to go on it. So you should have an extra strip that they gave you the measurement for in the pattern to cut that binding strip. Okay, so your binding strip was cut a little wider than you did for your clothesline pattern. And so you just take it and you're going to fold over to your ironing board, and you're just going to, or wherever you're pressing, and you're going to put wrong sides together in half, and you're going to press it down lengthwise, which I've already done. And this is a good time before you put your binding on to just go around on the inside where you were sewing. I got some little threads here. Always those little threads that will bug you. And I check on the outside to make sure that I caught everything real well. Got one little spot there. I'm just going to put a little tiny bit of glue, even though the stitches didn't catch, because when my binding comes over, I'm going to be sewing my binding, and I'll just touch that up by hand when I come back through. But you just check on the inside, see if you caught everything. And it looks like I did a lot better. I just have that one little spot on the outside, and I'll fix that when I hand sew my binding to the outside. And if you like one side or the other better, you can always probably flip this around, I would think, and just reshape it. When I was doing this one, I got going around and around, making my base, and I realized that I ended up with my base being wider than the basic bowl had suggested that I get it to. And I decided, well, I'm not going to tear that out. I'm going to leave it. And this one will be a little bit more shallow. And actually, my other one could fit right inside of that one if I was to store them away. And I kind of like that. And I don't mind that this one is shallow, because this one would be a good size that you could put some little balls of thread in if you do crochet or knitting, or you could lay a little project in here. There's a lot of uses for one to be wider and more shallow, so I decided to stay with it. So you're going to take your binding, and I'm going to probably start my binding over, let me see, this away, because I don't want to end off where I ended here. I kind of want to have my binding, well, it wouldn't hurt for it to be right there, actually. And then I can make sure that I'm pushing this down as I go across. So your edges of your binding are going to go up. And let me just move this down a little bit so you can see what I'm doing as I go. I'm going to leave a tail extra, 5-6 inches or so. And I'm going to line this up with the top of my bowl. And I'm going to clip this going around. And you're just going to lay it flat up against it. And this is a little different than if you've done binding on a quilt. It lays flat. This is going to be going in a circle. So as we go around, we're going to put a little bit more clips. And just make sure that it's staying flat as you go around. Just press your finger You don't have to stretch it, just press your finger and put some clips in here, and you're just going to do this all the way around the bowl. I keep calling them baskets. And some of you may even end up calling them baskets. But you just go all the way around the edge. And hopefully I didn't make this too wide for my binding. I think it's fine. If so, I just would have had to cut another piece and join them together, but I think I've got more than enough fabric here to go all the way around. And if you don't have clips, that's fine. You can easily use a pin. Pins will work just fine. You just take one and poke it in and push it down through, and the pins work just fine. So depending on what you normally use is what you'll use here. I like to use clips. There's a lot of uses for pins, of course. Okay, we're almost to the end around it. Let me see. Yes, I've got plenty to be able to attach it. So I'm going to get a little bit closer for the moment so that I can measure this up and see that I'm going to have the right amount. And what we're going to be doing is these two pieces that we have here, we're going to bring them together, and we're going to be joining them end to end. So I'm just going to, let me see, that will leave me plenty. I'm going to clip off this piece. I'm going to shorten it. And then I want to overlap this piece by a 1/2 inch. I'm going to get my little ruler here. And I'm just going to check it and make sure that I'm leaving just a 1/2 inch before I trim it. Make sure that's at a 1/2. There we go. And I'm going to fold it over, and I'm going to check one more time because I like to check things twice to make sure that I've got it right. And I'm just going to make sure that that overlaps by only a 1/2 inch, not more than a 1/2 inch. And I've got it just a tiny, tiny bit over. There we go. Okay. So now I can trim that piece off. And you always want to measure twice and cut once, because once you cut, you've cut it. You can't get it back together. Alrighty, so then you're going to take some clips out, or pins, enough so that these are floppy enough to make it a little bit easier for you. So I don't know if you've done binding or not before. Normally when we do binding, we would do it this way, and it would get sewn at a diagonal. If you're used to doing it with quilting, and then we would trim it in a diagonal. For this, we're just going to be sewing these end to end. And I do find that it helps if I put a clip on this side down a ways from where I'm going to be sewing, and a clip on the other side as well. And I'm going to do one in the top actually. So as I'm moving this over so it gets underneath my sewing, I won't be losing where I have the measurement. And now we're going to be back to doing a straight stitch. And you want to make sure your machine still knows that it's in woven heavy. We're still going to be going through quite a bit of thickness. And we're going to be sewing a 1/2 inch seam across this. And this is can be a little difficult. You kind of have to squish your bowl down there so you can get this underneath your foot. And you're just going to find your 1/2 inch on your guide. And I'm going to take that first clip out. I'm keeping my pieces together and getting it underneath that needle. And I do have it in straight stitch, so I'm good. Whoop, that moved my fabric on me, so I'm just going to lift my foot up and readjust it. I'm going to take one more clip out actually to make this a little bit easier on me. And you want to make sure your other fabric doesn't fold underneath it and you end up sewing that to the bottom, because that's not what we want to do. We just want to be able to get this under here and get it up to our 1/2 inch. Whoops, our 1/2 inch, not our 1/4 inch, or 3/4 inch rather. I just wanted it at 1/2 inch. Make sure you keep your fingers out of the way when you're sewing. When I get up to near that clip, just take that out. And make sure that this is staying flat. It was starting to look like it was going to bunch up on me. These are the times when I could use to be an octopus and have a little more hands. Okay. Whoops. That's not what I wanted to do. There we go. Okay, now I have my seam and it's together. I'm going to finger press this open. Just my seam, I'm going to finger press that open. And then I'm going to fold it back to how it was folded before. And just finger press across the bottom to keep that down. And then I'm going to go back and I'm going to reattach my sides. My binding to my side, rather. And that's looking a little tight, but I know that this fabric, batik wouldn't be the same way, and you need to have it more exact, but this is a stretchier fabric, and I know as I go around, if I don't have it looking a little tight like I do, when I come around, I would end up with some puckering. So I made sure to do that so that it's going to be very tight, so I can get ahead of the problem, so to speak. And I'm going to put my 1/4-inch guide foot in, and I'm going to adjust my machine so that it knows that I'm going to be doing a 1/4 inch. Now you could use your straight foot and just follow it along where your 1/4 inch guide is. But I really find that when I'm doing binding, it's so much easier, and many times it's so much easier, and that's the wrong foot, mind you. Let's get the one that actually has the guide on it. And let's get a white paper so that you can see, if you haven't seen one of these before, that you can see what I'm talking about. I'm hoping that picks it up a little bit better. There's a little guide over on this side, on the right side of your foot. And as your fabric's coming along, it's going up against that guide. And it keeps it so, and my needle will be positioned with my red line here. And it just makes it so much easier because this stays against where my fabric is on the end. And so I know I'm going to be getting a true 1/4 inch stitching going around. And it just makes it simpler for me in the end. I'm going to throw that other foot in here so I don't lose track of it. My little kitty, Yvonne, loves to come along and steal my feet. And I do not like spending all the time hunting one down. So I'm going to start over here right about just a little bit before where I ended off. And this side is up a little higher than this side. So we're going to have to do like a gradual adjustment for that. And I'm going to put an extra pin right here, because I'm trying to keep that side down, but I also want to be able to see when I'm getting to it that it's there. So I'm going to start just a little ways, maybe a couple inches away from that. Making sure that I have my end up there. I'm going to put another clip behind that just to keep that in place. And so just like how we were doing the sides of our bowl, we're going to get that under there. You might have to make sure that your foot is lifted all the way up. And I'm going to make sure that this fabric is, you know, flush with the, my darn fingers get right in the way when I'm trying to film, and it's frustrating, but we'll hold it like this for a minute. So I'm making sure that this is the top edge of my fabric right here, okay, where we folded. The fold side is down there. We want it to be flush with the outside here. And we're going to do a 1/4 inch seam going around. Close to that pin, I know that that is where that point is. And it's not such a big deal because when we get this all sewn around, we're going to be pulling it up around so that we can hand sew our binding. But I'm just going to poke that in there. And we're kind of transitioning from that side that's higher to this side that's lower, and if we're not paying attention, we won't even catch it. It will leave a gap there. So we kind of need to adjust our fabric a little bit. See how this side is up higher and this side is down lower. You just want to bring your fabric down there, and you're going to push it up against. I'm not worried about that point that's sticking out, like I said, because as I pull my binding over, it's going to pull that down into place. Okay, so I've gotten around that corner. I'm hoping that my fingers aren't in the way. Now I can go along and know that I'm past that point and take my clips out as I go. And we're almost done. And see how that would have started to pucker? Because I made sure it was kind of real tight at the other side, I can get this to lay down flat. And when I get to the end where I was over there, this pucker will work itself out. And that's because this fabric is a little stretchier. A batik would be stiffer. And so, and I love batiks, especially using it with the clothesline. For that very reason, because as you're going around and you're attaching your fabric to your clothesline, you tend to get puckers. But I'll show you in a minute. It gives it sort of an organic look too. The fact that it did have some puckers going around. It all depends on the look that you're trying to achieve. Whether or not you're using up scraps or you're planning it out. And as you go around, just readjust if this is getting away from the edge. And because I kept that taut, when I joined it, I don't have any puckers going around, even though this fabric was a little tiny bit stretchier, which is nice, because that's exactly what I wanted. I didn't want to end up with an overlap pucker in my binding. Now I'm going to reinforce it. I'm going to go back about 3-4 stitches and then come back. So I reinforce that so my binding stays nice and tight on there, and cut my thread. And I'm going to go around, and any long strings, I'm going to take them off just because they will bug me. They would be covered up anyways when you pull this around. And you just want to make sure that you got a hold of all your pieces. Right where this part is, where that angle was that we cut when we were ending off our rope, this little point here. This part doesn't matter because it's going to be underneath our binding. But right here on this end, I will put a little bit of fabric glue right over that and press it and let it dry. That will keep it from unraveling or causing any issues. Threads, threads, and more threads. So you're going to go around and you're just going to pull your binding over your edge, and you're going to clip it. Bring my clips back over here. And I just clip it as I go around. I think this is going to look really nice. I like this fabric, especially for a project like this. Almost to the end. Okay. And there, so right here you can feel where it changes in height. But we're just going to let it naturally go over the edge and not worry about that. There's not much space in there between the transition of this being higher on this side and this being a little bit lower. I got another thread there, darn it. And so I'm just going to put a clip there, and we've got it clipped all the way around. And you can go ahead and trim any extra threads. Once I sew my binding down, I just go around and push my hand on the inside and on the outside and shape my bowl. So let me bring the camera over here a little bit so you can see the bowl a little bit better. I think it came out pretty nice. So now your last step, you'll want to take some thread and a hand needle and just do a little stitch around. So I just take my needle and I'll poke it in here and go through so it's up in my fabric, between, you know, like up into the inside of the fabric. And just take a little tiny stitch down here and, you know, just a little at a time, hand stitch around, and we have our pretty basket. And as I was saying before, this one with the Duet is a little stiffer. And with the clothesline, it's a little floppier. And there's no problem with either one. It just depends on what you like, what your preference is. I'll be shaping this one. I spent time shaping it quite a bit. And I did my sides a little taller. Well, not much taller, really. Maybe only one round taller, actually, I think. But I don't have this one completely shaped. I haven't spent a lot of time shaping it yet. Each one has its way of, you know, they're almost the same, where you have to fold in and then fold it in half and sew it. With the clothesline, of course, you're pushing, you know, you have your clothesline in the center as you're bringing it over. And I did separate videos on each one. In some ways, this is a little bit easier than that one. In some ways, this one's a little bit easier than this one. It's just, you know, one of those things. You have to find what your preference is. Sometimes I think it would depend on what you're using your bowl for. But I like them both. I think that they're both pretty neat. Like I said, this one's keeps its shape a little differently. So I think it would just depend on what you're using it for. So once I get my binding done, I'll have some cute little balls. And I'll be sending these out to Barb so that she can show them on the Seaside Quilting Lives. We have lives on Facebook on the Seaside Quilting Supplies Facebook business page. If you go and like the page on Facebook, also change the notifications to all on there. You will see sales as they come up. You will see notifications for when the sale times come up every Thursday at 7 p.m. There's a live, and that's the one that we show notions and fabric and so forth. And then every other Sunday, and we just had one this last Sunday at 4 p.m. and both are Eastern time. We have a live on every other Sunday, and the Sunday ones are mostly all fabric, which is a lot of fun. It's almost like having your at-home shopper. They hold up Barb and Mary, they hold up the fabric and they show it to us, and they bring it close to the camera and give us an option to be able to see it. And I really enjoy it, because when you go shopping, it's like I have to all the time driving there and getting there and whatnot. I like having the at-home shopping feature, and the lives are a lot of fun. I've made a lot of friends. So I hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial. I hope that it's been helpful. If you have any questions, just leave me a comment and I'll be happy to see how I can help you. Please take a couple moments to like our video and subscribe to Seaside Quilting Supplies. Click on that little bell over next to the notifications, and next to the subscribe rather, and you can adjust it to all, so that as more of our tutorials come available, you will get notified. So, hope you have a good rest of your day. Happy sewing!